Hello everyone, welcome to Practical C++, the beginner's course. My name is Zach, and in this tutorial we will be discussing if statements. Now, if statements are a very important part of programming and C++ programming because an if statement, I want you to think of it as a way for a computer to make a decision based on certain conditions being met. Meaning, if you think about like a small weather app, there might be an if statement that says, if it is raining, then show a cloud on screen. But if it is sunny, then show the sun on screen. And that's kind of what an if statement is. It says, if this is true, then do this. And I want to show you that. I'm going to say if, and we're just going to put true in here, which is a Boolean variable, and we're going to go over that here in a second as well. We're going to say this code is ran. Okay? Let's actually add an end line. And when we run this, it'll say this code is ran because the condition inside these parentheses is true. And inside these parentheses is where you put your condition. So if we put false, okay, this code will not be ran. When we run it, you will not see this. It will just return 0. And just kind of show you, to kind of touch more on true and false, if you remember in one of the first tutorials over data types, we talked about Boolean data. And to do that, you type bool, because we're going to declare a Boolean data type. I don't think we actually did an example of Boolean data type, but I think we did discuss it maybe. And I'd actually have to check and look. But Boolean data is another data type that is either true or false. So we could say Boolean, var1 equals true, and bool var2 equals false. And then we could actually put the variable in here, so we could say bool var1, and which is holding the value true, and this code will be ran. If we run it, this code is ran, as you can see. So you can kind of see in this tutorial, along with if statements, we're also kind of learning about Boolean variables, which are a very important part of C++ programming as well, because all of these if statements are going to be focused on whether the condition inside these parentheses is true or false. Now, that being said, you don't have to have Boolean data in here necessarily. We could actually do something like this. We could do int num1 equals 5, and we can say if 5 is greater than 3, then run this code. And this is the greater than sign. And if we do that, it'll say this code is ran. Because, and actually I hard-coded 5 in here, but you could actually put num1 as well. If num1 is greater than 3, and it'll say this code is ran. Same token though, if 5 is less than 3, which it's not, then this condition is false, because 5 is not less than 3. That returns false, so this code will not be ran. If we run it, you can see process returns 0. This output statement was not ran. So that's pretty simple stuff. You can kind of make an if statement run based off of whether the condition inside here is true or false. And we're going to go more in depth with that later in this section when we make our own app. Practical app that you could use, and I might even make some kind of number guessing game. I haven't decided yet, but either way, we're going to really show how we can use these if statements to make really nice flowing code that makes decisions based on user input. So that being said, what if we wanted to add another part of this if statement, basically saying, if num1 is less than 3, we'll say, we'll actually say that, we'll say num1 is less than 3, but what if we want to say if num1 is greater than 3, we'll say num1 is greater than 3. Well, to do that, we put else if num1 is greater than 3, brackets, output, num1 is greater than 3. End line. And to make it more interesting, we're going to say int num1, and we're going to say enter a number, and then put that number in num1, and then depending on that will be what code is ran. So you can say when we enter a number, it's going to hold it in num1, okay, and if num1 is less than 3, this code is going to run. But else if num1 is greater than 3, then this code is going to run. Watch when we run it what happens. Enter a number. We're going to say 7. 7 is greater than 3, so this code down here should run, but this code right here should not. And when we hit enter, it says num1 is greater than 3, and only this code ran. And so to run multiple if statements together based on one calculation, kind of, you would use if and then else if. And then if you wanted to basically do a default, if all the above are false, you add else and then brackets, and then you don't add a condition to an else statement. This basically says if all else fails, if all these return false, then do this no matter what. So just kind of thinking about it, what would be the default? We could say, you know, if num1 is less than 3, do this. If num1 is greater than 3, do this. Well, otherwise, that would mean that num1 is equal to 3, right? So we could say else num1 is equal to 3. And to show you that, we'll run it, and we'll enter 3. I'll say num1 is equal to 3, because basically we didn't even have to do a condition, because it knows. It says, well, the way we did it, the way we coded it, we said if this is false and this is false, then do this. You know, if all else fails, do this. And that's what happened. But at that same token, you really don't even need this else statement. If you just wanted to do another else if, you could say else if num1 equals, and just to, this may seem confusing to you at first, but in an if statement, when checking if something is equal, you do need 2 equal signs. This may seem confusing at first, but it'll probably take a little bit of practice, but that's just how C++ and even Java is coded. You know, you do need 2 equal signs to check a condition inside an if statement. So that's why I have 2 equal signs here rather than just 1, because that will actually return an error. So we need 2 equal signs here. So basically it's saying if num1 is less than 3, do this. Else, if num1 is greater than 3, do all this. Else, if num1 is equal to 3, then say num1 is equal to 3. And that's the same thing as just saying else, do this, because those are really the only 3 possible outcomes. But you can see if you had a whole bunch of different statements, how you might just want an else statement at the end to return a default value, such as, you know, for instance, there's really not anything that would run this code. So you would say you didn't enter a number, you know, because that's probably what would happen. In fact, I think if we entered a string, it would actually return 0. It would just throw 0 or a garbage value in num1. So let's see. Let's just run it real quick. If we enter 3 again, this code will run num1 is equal to 3. But let's see if we don't enter. If we enter something, let's see if we can try to get this code to run. Such as if we run, just type in star or something. It'll say num1 is less than 3. And the reason why it's saying num1 is less than 3 is because, even though we entered star, is because num1 is a garbage value right now. because we entered star and we're supposed to have an integer value inside num1, so instead it threw a garbage value in there, which is probably actually 0. It probably just defaulted to 0. And we can actually check at the end of everything. We can actually output after all these if statements num1. So if we type in something like Zach says num1 is less than 3, and the reason why is because the default value for num1 just happened to be 0. That was the value in the memory address for num1, and that's why. So you can see how important it is that the user enters a number, because if he enters a string, then the first branch of code is going to get ran. This branch right here, which may not be what you want to happen. So it may may be a good idea in a program like this to put emphasis on number. There's obviously other ways you could handle it other than just putting emphasis on that. For instance, there's try and catch pieces of code, but that's all advanced stuff again, so we won't be worrying about that. But when you get into more advanced programming, you will be doing try and catch clauses and stuff like that, and catching your exceptions that get thrown for whenever the user enters wrong data. So that being said, that's pretty much all there is to if statements. I do think it's a good idea for you to maybe go look up the operators that you can do. For instance, if num1 is greater than, you can also do greater than equal, which means greater than or equal to 3. You can also do less than or equal, which basically if num1 is less than or equal to 3, it will say num1 is less than 3. If num1 is greater than or equal to 3, num1 is greater than 3. And let's just run that and see if both codes get ran, because basically if we enter 3, it'll say num1 is less than 3, because only this code got ran, but really it could have ran if we just had if instead of else if, because by putting else if, it's basically adding it on to these if statements. If we enter 3 again, I think all 3 of these will actually get ran. Let's check it real quick. I believe I believe it's actually froze, but I want you to play around with it right now, and just kind of look at all the different operators again. Another good one to look at is not equal to, exclamation point equal. That means not equal to. So if it says if num1 is not equal to 3, run this code. And so before moving on to the next tutorial, I really want you to practice these if statements and really watch where your code runs, and you can do stuff such as, I want you to use different data types too, because you could say if, for instance, if you had a variable called name equals Jim, string values. If you had a string in the name, and if the name was Jim, you could basically run this code, if name equals Jim, it'll say welcome Jim, or something like that. So just mess around with it, practice with these if statements, and in the next tutorial we're going to look at an alternative to if statements called switch statements, and you'll kind of be able to decide on your own which ones you like using more in your code, or when's the right situation to use which one is, and I think you'll find it pretty interesting. So stay tuned.